So we're so happy to have you all here at the Scarborough Public Library, and I'm excited about this event. We have emerald ash borer in our parking lot as we speak. So if you want a real life example, go ahead and look at that on your way up. I'm just very curious to learn more about it. So thank you all, the presenters, for being here. Before we get started, we're just going to play a brief land acknowledgement.
The Scarborough Public Library acknowledges that it is located in the traditional homeland, past and present, of tribes in the Wabanakik Confederacy. We recognize and honor the current tribes who comprise the Confederacy: the Penobscot, the Passamaquoddy, the Maliseets, and the Micmac, who have stewarded this land throughout the generations. We acknowledge the Owaskoag people who once lived in what is now Scarborough. We respect the traditional values of these tribes and support their efforts for land and water protection and restoration. In offering this land acknowledgement, we affirm Indigenous sovereignty, history, and experiences.
Thanks everyone for joining us and everyone zooming in. I'm really grateful to the Scarborough Public Library and the folks at Ash Protection Collaboration across Wabanakik for coming together in this collaboration to spread information and awareness about what's going on with our ash trees and how to assist in their survival. If you aren't familiar with the Scarborough Land Trust, hopefully many of you are, but if you're not, we are your local land trust. We conserve over 1,600 acres across town in Scarborough and many expanding trail networks. We do all of that with the help of donations and volunteer time. So if you're interested in donating or volunteering with us at all, you can speak to me after the presentation, or you can put your name and contact information down at the back of the room. You can also hop on our website and fill out our volunteer form. I have some cards back there if you want to take my contact info. I also have brochures and our latest newsletter, stickers, all kinds of fun stuff that you can avail yourselves of at the end. Like I said, we conserve land for wildlife and for people to recreate here in Scarborough. And we have been trying to go out and do some ash tree inventorying as quickly as we possibly can. And I've had the pleasure of going to trainings and listening to and enjoying the information that the APCAW folks have made available through their very, very hard work. So I know a little bit about what we're doing here to prevent the spread of EAB and to protect our ash trees, but these folks know a lot. So congratulations to all of you for listening to them speak. I think they're going to give us a fantastic presentation. And like I said, if you have questions about the land trust, please reach out to me or ask me questions during our Q&A or after the presentation or any old time. Thanks for joining us.
Hello, everyone. Wabanakik, Mi'kmaq, Talawisi, Tyler Everett. I'm a person of Dawn and Mi'kmaq. My name is Tyler Everett. I'm a part of the APCAW lab. I'm a PhD student at the University of Maine. And my research through the APCAW lab is focused on protecting really culturally significant tree. At the center of all the work that APCAW does is this one species of tree, brown ash or black ash. Is what most people call it, but locally here in Maine and a lot of basket makers and ash harvesters, we call it brown ash. And so for a singular species to be the center of all of our work, it must have a lot of value. And that value falls in two different categories. Got the cultural significance, which I'm going to cover. There's also this ecological significance. There's a really unique forest, a really unique tree that provides a lot of benefit to us as a society in these forests, but also there's this cultural significance. Brown ash, if you've seen it in the forest, you probably had your muck boots on, really likes its feet wet. So your swamps along stream corridors, along river terraces, that's where you're gonna find brown ash. And it likes its feet wet, so it's in these really marshy areas that there's not a lot of competition because not a lot of plants can stand that sort of saturation throughout the period of the growing season. So they're specially adapted to thrive in these sites. And then they also have nutrient-rich leaf litter. And so they're casting their leaves each year and they're depositing lots of nutrients to these really harsh sites that otherwise wouldn't see that sort of great nutrient. It's also a shade intolerant species. So along these river terraces, along these stream corridors, a lot of times flooding will cause a lot of disturbance and create a gap in the canopy. And when sunlight hits those areas, that's where you see a lot of brown ash popping up. And so it's a shade intolerant species. A lot of times you'll find it at an even age stand because of that. But these trees are really resilient. So there's always a continuous recruitment in these sites. So you don't always see it as an even aged pocket. Sometimes it's a whole range of different size classes within an ash forest. Brown ash is a really small component of Maine's hardwood forests, and ash in general. There's 3 species of ash in Maine. And I think Emily will cover that when we get to seed collection, but brown ash is an even smaller component of that. In these small scattered pockets across the landscape, and that makes it really challenging from a preservation or conservation standpoint to find these sites and do this work that we're going to talk about. So the cultural significance. Brown ash is really culturally significant to the indigenous peoples of this region. Brown ash is cited in one of the creation stories for the Wabanakik, the people of the Dawn. And so in that story, all of the Wabanakik people, their origin is from the brown ash tree. So you've got this cultural significance. But then as many of you've seen, there's lots of beautiful baskets that are made out of brown ash. It's a principal building material. All the splints that you see in those baskets are made out of brown ash. And so without that tree, you don't have those baskets. And then within the families, yeah, so I was gonna pass around some of those baskets. Within the families that make these brown ash baskets, there's oftentimes generations of different basket makers that have passed that knowledge on. So you've got this generational knowledge, it's traditional knowledge. They've got knowledge about where these trees grow, how they grow, when they're ready to be harvested. The sites that they harvest from are oftentimes secretive because they are really quality sites. They don't want other basket makers or non-indigenous basket makers to know where those sites are. So that they can take care of those sites because they realize that the relationship they have with that tree is taking care of their family. And so in order to take care of that tree, they need to realize that the knowledge of those sites and the knowledge of those trees is really important, that they pass it on to people who are ready to do it. So very culturally significant. You've got this generational knowledge, the creation story, and then there's also the economic income from the sale of these baskets. A lot of basket making families will go to basket shows and sell their baskets. If you've ever had the opportunity, and you don't have great images or video to show the process, but it's really laborious. You know, you got to find the one out of thousands of trees that's basket quality. You got to cut that tree. You got to buck it up into lengths that are suitable for then pounding out those individual splints, repeatedly pounding that tree when it separates on those growth rings. Then you get the splint material. And then what actually peeled off the tree gets, brought down to even thinner ribbon-like pieces that then get used in the baskets. And then of course, it's lots of training, lots of knowing how this material works, how it's bent, how its physical characteristics aid it to make such unique pieces of art. So it's a labor of love, and that's why these baskets are very expensive. And they can sell these baskets at these basket shows and get a lot of income for their families. It's really important to those families. And so there's also the ecological significance. I talked about how unique these sites are and how they're delivering nutrient-rich leaf litter to these sites. They're also uniquely adapted in terms of their hydrology. They're, again, reliant on the wet soils that these sites have, but they also fluctuate the water table at these sites. They're especially adapted. They have what's called hypertrophied lenticels on the bark of the tree. It helps with air exchange when the soil is saturated for most of the growing season, something that's special for brown ash. There's other wetland tree species that do it, but there's really nothing that will replace the way that brown ash works in these spaces. And of course, we have the value, but why is that so important? It's because there's this threat. Here in Maine, we have emerald ash borer. It arrived in 2018. It started in the Lake States in the early 2000s, and it spread very rapidly over here to Maine. First was detected in northern Maine and just across the border in Canada. And then our second detection was shortly thereafter in southern Maine. And it's expanded really rapidly in southern Maine, and it's really slowly spread in northern Maine. In southern Maine, it's gotten to the point where here we have it in the parking lot, but the latest quarantine maps on the next slide, and it's moved well beyond Scarborough. The way that emerald ash borer attacks these trees is it lays its eggs on the outer bark of these trees in the early spring. Within a couple of weeks, those eggs hatch, and then these little larvae, these small worm-like emerald ash borer, young emerald ash borers, bore into the tree, and then they feed on the outer cambium layer of the tree. And they feed so intensely, and they are in such high numbers that they girdle the tree completely. It can't locate nutrients and water in the tree. And so it girdles it and chokes it out and it dies. And sometimes it can, with brown ash in particular, can happen within 2 years. In terms of species preference, emerald ash borers prefer brown ash over all of the others. So we're in a really tough spot with this really unique and special tree. But it will attack all true ash. So all of the ash here in Maine are subject to being attacked by emerald ash borer. So it's been detected in 36 states, 5 Canadian provinces. And across that range, anywhere that brown ash has occurred on the landscape, Indigenous peoples of that region have worked with brown ash and know its qualities and how important it is. And so if you just look at the map and range of emerald ash borer, 117 federally recognized tribal nations today can be impacted by emerald ash borer in its current spread. And here we're in some of the last strongholds of ash that aren't affected by emerald ash borer. So we're in a really critical time to respond and try and protect this tree. So this is the current quarantine for emerald ash borer. It was an emergency order, which is like you get a detection and the state tries to act really quickly and put something in place to slow the spread of emerald ash borer. But then we have to attend public hearings and share our thoughts on it. And then once that's done, then they adopt a true quarantine. And so we've made it through that process, and now this is the true quarantine. And it's got a good buffer around those detections, but as you notice, some of them are pretty far from this really localized portion at the bottom of the screen. See if I can use my zoom. There. Yeah, so it's really localized here in southern Maine where the detections have started. So back in 2018, we've seen lots of really localized spread. And that's the natural spread of emerald ash borer. But when you see these small secluded detections of emerald ash borer, those are satellite infestations. And a lot of times what happens is there's a transport of firewood that has emerald ash borer in it. And that's how emerald ash borer spreads to these isolated areas. And that's caused this quarantine to spread at a much higher rate than it would on its natural spread. And so we really still have to be thinking, even though emerald ash borer is in Maine, and we have this quarantine or this ban of movement of firewood into the state of Maine, we have to really think about moving firewood within the state. So we can't, let our guard down. Emerald ash borer could still be in firewood, or I mean, if you have an ash tree here in Scarborough that fell down in a storm, or someone in your family does, makes sense as you're headed up to camp, you cut that tree up and bring that firewood. Well, that could be just the exact thing that causes these satellite infestations. You have to think about what may be in that tree before you bring it to camp. And now I'm going to pass it to Ella to talk about our collaborators and the work that we do.
Thanks, Tyler. So Tyler talked a bit about the significance and the threat. I'm going to talk about how are we responding. And we've really had the privilege of working on a response for a really long time because of communication between basket makers. So when in the early 2000s, when in the Midwest, ash forets were really starting to be affected by emerald ash borer, they called basket makers in Maine and said, hey, we're starting to see trees die. So then basket makers started organizing with scientists, researchers at the University of Maine, as well as the state government and the federal government to try to respond to this and get ahead of it.
So finally, when it landed in Maine in 2018, the state was able to impose the quarantine regulations that you just saw up on the screen. So we had a really early response, and we've slowed the spread a lot more effectively than a lot of other states. And that's resulted in this really huge collaboration of a lot of different groups that continues to grow. 94% of land in Maine is privately owned, so we're gonna have to work with a bunch of different partners like land trusts, private landowners, different groups like Wabanakik Youth and Science that are out on the land all the time. We also work with the Basket Makers Alliance and a bunch of different research organizations and the state. And you'll see that we have all the tribal government logos up here too. But only in the last year did we start really working under the name, the Ash Protection Collaboration across Wabanakik. And that's because we recognize the need to start educating the public and getting people involved in actions to protect ash. So our team at Maine, which is Emily, Tyler, me and our advisor, John Daigle, as well as a bunch of other researchers and collaborators we've had over time, co-developed this name. And you might be wondering what Wabanakik is. It's the region where Wabanaki people of the Don have lived since time immemorial, and that includes parts of Canada, up in New Brunswick, and all the way out into New Hampshire. And you can see the breakdown of the different tribes and where they live. And so we're a collection of non-Indigenous people and Indigenous people. I'm non-Indigenous myself, but we're all working together to get other people to start caring for forests. And so we co-created 2 avenues to get information out about Emerald Ash Borer. The first is our website, and you can navigate to our URL up there. You'll check it out. It has a bunch of different information about different things you can do, seed collection, ash inventory. It has our upcoming events, and this year we're hoping to build a research library too, to share with the public some of the work that we've been doing, as well as like other researchers across the US. It also, slightly different than the state website on Emerald Ash Borer, it shares a lot of information about cultural importance of ash, and there are resources in that section. And our website was intended to really complement the state's website, which shares like quarantine regulations and how to detect the AV by adding that cultural perspective about ash. And then in 2023, we also held 10 webinar and in-person events that reached, I think we had over 900 registrants total. So we reached a lot of people, a lot of different land trusts came, foresters, private landowners. And we started really building a community of people who are engaged in protecting ash. And so we started with an event about the cultural importance of brown ash. And Tyler did an inventory training. We did seed collection trainings. There are some YouTube webinars about ash genetics. If that's something that interests you, you can check out our YouTube channel to learn more. And we're hoping to hold some more events this year. In the fall, we're going to have a big brown ash colloquium where we bring a bunch of different researchers and basket makers together to all talk about protecting brown ash. And that'll be at University of Maine, probably in October and early November. So we hope to see you there. And then we're really upping our seed collection efforts this year. And folks like Sammy at Scarborough Land Trust are doing us a great service getting engaged in organizing community events where anybody can collect seed, and also build a relationship with ash trees. So we're hoping to rely a lot more on volunteer support, as well as maybe do some of our own seed collection events this year. So come out and get engaged. And Emily, I think, is gonna talk a little bit more about seed collection specifically.
Okay, thank you, Ella. My name is Emily Francis, and I am a PhD candidate at the University of Maine in the APCAW lab. And I am the seed collection person who took on this big project when I started my degree a couple years ago now. And So one of the big things when we got started was there were people that were interested in, protecting the species and, working against the spread of emerald ash borer. And one thing that people had continually asked the researchers involved is how to collect seed, which seems like it should be a pretty straightforward process. Unfortunately, finding all of the literature and information took a much larger effort than any of us were thinking. We originally thought that there was going to be this, 10-page document that we'd be able to give all the information. It'd be really easy. That's not what happened. It's quite a large manual now. So I'll give you more information on how to access the manual, but it's been a labor of a lot of people, a lot of different talents, a lot of different skills to create what we've been able to teach and work with and pass off to other people in the last year. So Tyler's a really great overview of ash, and particularly brown ash, and the state of emerald ash borer and where the spread is currently. And so I'm gonna talk more on the ash seed and collecting side. So Tyler had also mentioned about the cultural significance specifically of brown ash, but the other two species that we have in Maine are white and green, which are both important in the timber industry. White is more of a timber species, and green ash is what you're gonna see as your municipal trees. It's probably what you have right out here at the library that is infested. So those are the trees that you're going to see in town, and those are the ones that, if you go to a tree nursery, you're probably going to be buying a white or green ash. Brown is more likely what you're gonna see in the deeper forests and the swamps and places that most people don't want to go. But ash trees have a larger economic impact to the state as a whole. And Tyler talked about the importance to Wabanakik people, specifically the brown ash. So why harvest the seeds? The seed, not only is there the ability to hold seed while we have this threat coming through with a high mortality, high to 100% mortality of a species. And yes, we're hoping that this invasive insects will pass, but it's never really going to pass. It's going to be on the landscape. It's going to be part of our forests, and we now have to figure out how to live with that. And seed is going to be a big part of that, because once we lose what's on the landscape, we have to have seed as backup. So seed will be important in research conservation methods, specifically with genetic studies. Ella mentioned that we do have a video on our YouTube page, which our friends and partners at Pennsylvania State University, they do the genetic side. We love that they can do that because we are not geneticists. So we're really glad that we're able to partner with a group like that, who's interested in working with the species that's so important. You also collect seed for future plantings, regeneration, and just safekeeping and seed banks. So, but the goal of collecting seed is to provide those who are invested in protecting this species a way to be involved in the current effort to collect. And that doesn't say scientists, that doesn't say, a specific group of people, it's anybody who's interested. So then we have the creation of this brown ash seed collection manual. When I first started working on it, I considered it like a living document because I didn't want my footprint as the author to be on it forever. It's whoever's a part of this, whoever's working on this has the ability to update it and then have it live on in another version on our website. So the goal is that it's never a finalized piece of work. And we're specifically looking at the non-researchers. So a lot of the literature that I went through originally was very technical, very science heavy. My background is actually in social sciences, so that was not my avenue of education even to begin with. So going through all that and creating this document, it was so that anybody can read it. We had a pretty extensive review process. It was reviewed by our lab. some really close researchers that we work really closely with at the US Forest Service. Wild Seed Project, who's going to speak in a minute, basket makers, who works very closely with the state of Maine. And then we were able to pilot test the manual with our seed collection trainings that we did last year. And the manual is available on our APCAW website. So we also have a longer video on the website that will talk through the document quite a bit more, but I'm not gonna do all of that today. But I'll just give you a quick rundown on seed collection. Let's say you're a landowner or you're a volunteer at a land trust and you're helping, if you're, working with Scarborough Land Trust, if you live right here, you're going to be looking to identify the different kinds of ash to be able to say, that you're collecting white ash or green ash or brown ash. You need to identify the sex of a tree. So there are male, female, and polygamous, so that we do have trees that are both male and female, and they flower at different times so they don't pollinate themselves. And those can be very tricky, as Tyler will tell you. Preparing for collection, gathering the materials, make sure you have everything when you go out to prepare, especially where brown ash can be in really swampy areas. You don't want to get stuck having walked 20 minutes into the woods in your muck boots and realize you forgot your clipboard. So you want to make sure you have everything planned before you go in. You also need to decide where you're going to send seed. I'll talk a little bit more about that in a minute. And then you actually get to do the collection part. Then you need to prepare for storage and then store the seeds or send the seeds somewhere to be stored. So if you're really interested in doing this year round, you could technically be working on this all year round. Probably not what most people are interested in, and that's totally fine. This is just a little bit of a chart about what you could be working on each part of the year so that you are totally prepared when it is time for seed collection. But what's most important is what you see in April and May. That's the spring seeds, spring tree scouting. And that's when you're gonna go out and you're gonna identify your trees. You're going to look for the sex of the tree, evidence of EAB activities, and you're going to mark for potential collection, because those are the trees you're gonna go out and watch the rest of the summer to see if they're going to be producing seed. It hasn't been mentioned yet, but brown ash in particular only produces seeds every 5 to 8 years, unless there's a lot of stress, which we could see that cycle be set off because of all of the EAB threat that we have right now and the stress of that. But you don't want to miss the seed year, because if you miss it at this point, you're really losing. We're going to be losing out. So you're going to monitor the seeds over the summer. You're going to have a seed collection time in the fall. Les Benedict, who we've mentioned, is our connection with the St. Regis Mohawk Aquasaucony in New York. He has been working on brown ash for 30 years, and he says that don't bother going out to collect after Indigenous Peoples' Day, because it's windy up here in the Northeast, and most likely the seed is going to be off the trees by then. So your time frame is really September to early October. This is another, lots of words on there. This is really just a materials list. It's in the document. We have an example up here of some of the seed collection materials and things that we need. We really want to make this as easy as possible for people. A lot of, landowners, they might potentially have loppers to, cut brush in your yard and do things like that. So you don't need to go out and buy something like that. What we're trying to do is give a recommendation of, what we think is necessary for seed collecting, but it's really up to you and your organization, or you as a private landowner, of, how into this you want to get and how much effort you want to put into it. Well, all of that is very detailed in the manual. Then finally, well, there's one slide after this, but this is where to send seed. And there are 3, under this where it says locations for storage. We have the University of Maine, the USDA Agricultural Research Facility in Iowa, which is an ash specific research lab. Then there's also a USDA facility in Colorado, which is called the Black Box. The Black Box If you're just a private landowner, unless you really, really want to get into seed collecting and storage, I wouldn't worry about that. It's much more of a research focused place to store. It's for long-term deep freeze storage. Iowa, if you're gonna send seed to Iowa, they're actually gonna test the health of the seed, the longevity of the seed. They're gonna put that into a system where anybody who's researching that can pull the seed out. So it's not necessarily where you would ever be able to get to pull your own seed out. So that's a little bit different. At the University of Maine, that's our group at APCAW. We're looking to we have our first refrigerator set up and we're starting to hold seed ourselves. We're working very closely with the tribes to help them explore and make decisions on if they would like to store seed on site for themselves or if they want to work with us. But if you're here in Maine and you'd like to store seed with us for our research purposes, you're more than welcome to do that. And we would love to get everybody involved who's interested. This is just very basic, the collection technique options, and then an example of what that, the materials for it look like. Pole pruners, I don't think anybody brought them inside, but they're quite long. But that's if you're trying to reach seed that's very high up in a tree, depending on where the trees are located that you're interested in. If it's something that's in your backyard, you may be able to reach for the seed and cut it down yourself. But if you're in a deep forest, they could be 30 feet off the ground and you're gonna need a pole. So you gotta know how in depth you wanna get with this when you start. This is just an example of a pocket rope saw where you would throw it over a branch and then be able to saw a branch down to pull seed down. A big shot. Do we have a video of that anywhere?
I have a video on my phone.
Okay.
I can show people.
A big shot it's just as much fun as it looks. It's a giant slingshot for putting something over a tree. You can put the pocket saw, you can just put a weight over it to shake it if the seed is really dry and coming down. It is pretty cool to watch, and I've watched both Tyler and Ella. I don't think I've actually used it, but you guys have excellent aim. And then this is the rope and the weight that you use with that system. We highly suggest goggles or safety glasses and helmets if you plan on using a big shot. And there are a lot of examples. The US Forest Service actually has a video on how to use the big shot as well. So I just want to say thank you to everybody. I'm going to pass off Wild Seed Project. And if anybody's interested, we can put the slide up that has the URL at the end and the QR code if you're interested in more information.
Hello there. I'm just going to talk very briefly. I'm Emily Basin. I'm the director of the seed program at Wild Seed Project. And first, I just want to say my major gratitude and thanks to the APCAW lab. My background is in entomology and wildlife conservation. And I did a lot of my studies in Delaware and spent a lot of time in Pennsylvania and really saw the destruction that happened there with the ash trees. So it means a lot to see what Maine's doing and what the APCAW lab is doing with connectivity and relationship building and really making an obvious difference out there. So thank you. So I'm just going to talk a little bit about our partnership with the APCAW lab. So Wild Seed Project is a nonprofit that's focused on giving everybody the tools and resources needed to be able to grow native plants everywhere they spend time. So where we come into the APCAW picture, we can help provide seed sowing education. We do general native seed sowing workshops throughout the state in the fall. We have some connections with some really great artists. So we're working to try to help create, we have some cool art on how to sow general native seeds, but we're working to bring artists in to try to make some art around specifically sowing ash seeds and getting them out into the world. We're also helping to monitor ash stands and help identify and track and collect some potential good seeds. We have some monitoring happening in the schools. Nell Boots, who is in charge of a lot of our youth programming, is in the schools with kids, helping teach how to identify these ash, because we know the best way to keep things moving is to get kids involved. We also are trying to help folks who want to maybe set up a nursery of their own to grow on ash seeds. We are building a nursery in Cape Elizabeth with partnership of the Cape Elizabeth Land Trust at the Turkey Hill Farm property. So folks are welcome to come there and see how we're building our growing system up, and any other aid that we can provide. We're always interested in how we can provide more aid in this endeavor. And then we also are providing seed collection support. We have 3 kits available that we've built that folks can pick up, and we'll keep them stocked. We'll restock them for anybody who maybe doesn't have the supplies or just wants it all in a kit ready to go. We have 3 of them that can either be picked up at our North Yarmouth office, or I can always meet anybody at the Turkey Hill property and give them to them as well. So if folks are interested in that and just don't have all the supplies, we have them. Don't worry about it. Come and get it from us, and get those seeds out to where they need to be. A lot of the Wild Seed Project mission involves actually planting seeds and growing them on and having plants to then make more seed. But with ash, it's a little bit different, because we do really need to start saving seeds and start doing this genetic testing. So the big thing that I encourage people to do is think about where they want that seed to go. And if they want to maybe split some of it to the genetic testing and some of it to grow on and have for planting, and think about, if you had success in growing your own ash seeds, where those seedlings might go. I highly encourage reaching out to APCAW and connecting with some of the tribal nurseries that might want to have some of that ash to grow on. And we can do some short-term storage. We have a few fridges that get filled very, very quickly. But we can hold things for folks for like intermittent times for a few years if they don't have anywhere to put it. So I'm going to talk a little bit about seeds and seedling care, since we are growing ash currently. The Wild Seed Project method is like the most low-key, low-effort method, but it does take much longer than the classic horticulture protocols that you'll see for growing ash. It is a plant that, if grown outside, the seeds require 2 winters to break their dormancy. So it does take a while. Horticulturalists can get around that, and home growers, but it takes a little bit more effort by fridging the seeds for certain periods of time, and then taking them out of the fridge for a certain period of time, and then putting them back in the fridge for an amount of time. And that's called artificial stratification, but we kind of get around that. And we try to move as slow as plants do. Sometimes we don't actually, but we sow everything outside to get those cold periods. So we did some sowing this morning with the APCAW lab. And the big thing is that these seeds need light, so they need a very small amount of soil coverage. We can pass some pots around in a second. And they need a lot of water. So it's really important to remember to keep these seeds watered throughout the growing season, since it does take 2 years. We want to not forget about them in August, when you're running around and trying to go to the beach and maybe there's a drought happening, to make sure we don't forget about those seeds. But we're growing on a few ash seedlings now, slow and steady, and trying to begin some ash groves, hopefully planted at Turkey Hill, and providing ash seedlings for anybody who's looking to set up ash groves. And we're kind of testing all sorts of new methods. We're always trying new things out, different types of sand, what kind of location or what kind of pot will work best for these. Like these guys said earlier, brown ash isn't a common one in the horticulture industry, so there's not like a ton of information on growing them, especially for outdoor growth like this. Really, Les Benedict is the one who has the most protocols available. So we're trying to figure out how well that works in coastal Maine and test it all out. And our whole goal is to teach people how to do this and keep them going and keep the momentum. So I did bring some ash seeds and some sown ash if we want. I'll pass them around. Sure. Smell a little bit. You can see really just how simple it is. It's just a pot with soil, and then we sprinkle the seeds on top. We sow them fairly densely. If you think about how they might land in the wild, there's gonna be other plants and seeds and stuff around, so that we try to mimic what would happen naturally. And then we cover them with a light amount of sand. We use sand to cover our seeds. We do this for all of our native plants. There's a whole bunch of reasons. But the big thing is what we're trying to do, like I said, is mimic the natural state of things. And if we covered them with soil, freezes and thaws make heave happen. It makes all sorts of things move around a lot more, and the sand doesn't move things around as much. It holds the seeds in place and still allows sun and light to penetrate to help with germination success. So we're trying to use the Wild Seed Project method of seed growing with these ash seedlings, and hopefully it will work. I'll pass it back to you guys for questions.
Yeah. Thanks, everyone, for listening. I don't know how much time we have, but we could probably take a few questions.
We can take some questions. Yeah, I don't know if there's some questions that are consumers.
Yeah, I'm gonna try not to throw off.
Question, is there something involved in quarantining an area besides, the moving of firewood? Is that what that means?
Yes, yeah, so the quarantine includes all Fraxel species, except for the roots. You're allowed to move the roots. But yeah, in no above ground portion of the tree is allowed to be moved. So that includes pulpwood, which you see a lot of times in the timber industry, log material you see in the timber industry. And then for basket makers, the logs that they're trying to move to make baskets, those also can't be moved. There's a workaround in that if you peel the tree, you've done the processing of that tree and that can be moved. If it's still a whole tree where you haven't pounded it, then they still ask that you try to get a permit, but once you've pounded it and you have actual splint material, then you're totally fine to move it. But yeah, so it includes all Fraxel and firewood in general. So it's not just ash firewood, it's all hardwood firewood.
Is the brown ash in different locations in the state, do they seed at different times? I mean, you said it every 5 to 8 years. Do they run the gamut? Like you could go north and find some that are seeded, but they wouldn't be down?
Yeah, so they are a masting species in that there's a big mast year, but then there's these intermittent trees here and there that do seed out outside of that big mast year. But the mast year, generally, it's like everywhere you've seen seed production. Sometimes it's a little delayed, like the last time we had a big seed year 2 years ago. Southern Maine seemed to be really prolific, and it was really lagged in northern Maine that they didn't get their seed till late in the season. But yeah, so there is a masting year, but you'll see seed pop up just in really low quantities.
There's a question from one of our Zoom attendees, wondering if there's any treatment available for infected trees right now.
Yes, so there's, so we can be proactive in silviculture. We do silviculture and harvesting these forests to try and promote the next generation. Emerald ash borer is gonna try to attack the overstory trees first. And so we know that those trees are gonna succumb to emerald ash borer, but they're our seed source. But those seeds need to have growing space allocated. And if we start them now, they're gonna maybe be a little bit of a leg up on if there was a complete decimation of the stand and we're relying on the seeds that were in the seed bank, the natural seed bank, to try and regenerate that site. So silviculture is step one. And then we can also think about monitoring. Earlier we know about emerald ash borer, the more likely we can time those silvicultural prescriptions at a timely manner. So we have to monitor for emerald ash borer, find when it's active at a site. And then if you get to a point where emerald ash borer is at the site or is very close to the site, you can think about chemical treatment of ash trees. So trees that are really intrinsically valuable, like if it's in the center of your town, those a lot of times get treated with the insecticide. In the forest, it's not as common, but we're starting to catch a lot of momentum about bringing those in a full integrated pest management strategy in the forest. And the idea there is that we would look for the seed trees, the trees that would be providing that next generation of ash trees at a site. We treat those throughout that site. We might be able to maintain ash on that landscape over the long term and maybe survive that initial wave of emerald ash borer. What all of that does would buy us time, and so it buys time for this other strategy, which is the biological controls, where researchers went to Asia, where emerald ash borer is from, found these parasitoid wasps that lay their eggs into emerald ash borer larvae or into emerald ash borer eggs, and they feed on either the eggs or the larvae, and then kill that larvae and then create more of this parasitoid wasp. They don't sting people, they're very small, and there was lots of rigorous testing of those wasps to make sure that they're very host specific. They're really only going to impact emerald ash borer. Obviously, there's risk with that, risk with the insecticides, but I talked about the significance of these trees. All of that significance outweighs that risk, and so the general encouragement is to participate in some of those programs and obviously think through whether or not that's a risk you're willing to take personally, and then insecticides, chemical treatments, and biocontrols are all options.
Who's doing the biocontrol testing and where is it being done? And how long has it been underway? And do we have any sense of, I mean, it's gonna take a long time to evaluate the risks. So can you fill us in a little bit more on that?
Yeah, it's really quick after emerald ash borer was detected that they started to try and find what these wasps were. Unfortunately, in Asia, there was not a lot of information about emerald ash borer. It was kind of one of those background mortality events that nobody really took time to study in great
Right.
detail. So it took some time, but I don't know the exact date when they started to do testing, but it takes a long time to get a biocontrol cleared for release in North America. And they've been cleared for release since 2012. So since 2012, mostly in the lake states, these parasitoids have been reared and then released into the environment. And that's slowly moved across as emerald ash borer moves. Once they detect emerald ash borer, then they gotta assess that site, see if it meets certain parameters, and then if it's a good site to release the biocontrol, because they're really expensive to rear or grow, then they're selected as a release site. We have release sites in Maine.
Really? So who's they?
So it's USDA APHIS is
Okay.
what heads the whole program. And then
Okay.
each state, their forestry department, or if they have a different department, here it's the Maine Forest Service, works with USDA APHIS to coordinate through cooperative agreements, these releases.
And do we have any sense yet of, since this has been underway of?
Yeah, there's some hope. So there's certain biocontrols that have better success rates in terms of establishment. Tetrasticus is one of them that seems to really do a good job of getting established, but it's not very cold hardy. So as you get up in here into the Northeast, it's not as foolproof of a solution. There's some that are from Russia that are also in emerald ash borer's native range that are more cold hardy. And those are starting to see some success. And they also have longer ovipositors, which are these organs that they use to inject the eggs. And the reason it's good that it's long is the larger trees with thicker bark are the ones that we really want to protect because they're the seed source trees. And that longer ovipositor allows that parasitoid to lay its eggs in those larger diameter trees. So those are all hopeful things. And we're starting to see some success where you peel some of these trees, and some of these trees that are now regenerating and they're starting to get attacked by emerald ash borer. A lot of the larvae are dying, and they're not dying because of the tree, they're dying because of the parasitoid. So there's some hope that the establishment isn't just so they're around, it's so that they're, actually having an impact on the population now. So It's only some sites.
Do you have one of the text for wasps in the den?
No, these are all emerald ash borer.
And can you tell us a teeny bit more about the life cycle of the emerald ash borer? Is it,
Yeah. Yeah, so, in the early spring, that's when, the adults emerge. They hang out on that same tree for about 2 years, or sorry, 2 weeks. And so for 2 weeks, it feeds on the leaves of the tree. Generally, it emerges from or something close to an ash tree. And it'll feed on that foliage, and it's just getting enough energy to go and find a mate. That's the only thing that they do. So, in that small month, they've, mated with a male, or a female and male mated. And then they lay their eggs on an ash tree nearby, and generally they don't fly very far. But if there's no available ash trees, like you cut all your ash trees, then they've got to fly further, so. clear
so it's
cutting all
about a
our ash.
month from the larvae emerging to adulthood to mating?
That it's a month from adult emerging, mating and laying an egg.
Okay, and the eggs overwinter,
The eggs overwinter on the bark, and then early spring,
right?
they're, yeah.
So pretty much an annual cycle.
Yeah, 1 year life cycle, yeah.
And when,
And sometimes if it's really cold, it takes 2 years though, but they're overwintering under the bark as larvae.
and when the adults mate and lay their eggs, do they die soon after that?
They do, yeah,
Okay.
and,
Sorry, I didn't want to interrupt you.
I was just gonna say that once they're under the bark, they'll feed, and if it's really cold, that's when they'll overwinter under the bark. They curl up into a jay larvae and they'll just stay underneath the bark, kind of in a temporary hibernation. And then once the growing season reinitiates, it'll start to bore again and then emerge. And so if it's really cold, then it's beneficial to us. It slows the spread of emerald ash borer, but with climate change and being in southern Maine, that's less and less common.
I was sort of just about gonna ask about was, the spread in southern Maine has been so much faster than in northern Maine, and is the idea because of the different climate conditions between northern and southern Maine?
Yeah, so there's been a lot of peeling and delimitation of the emerald ash borer infestation in northern Maine, and that's what they found is a lot of jay larvae. So those emerald ash borer beetles up there are taking the 2-year life cycle, and in southern Maine, they're all on a 1-year life cycle. The issue with the 2-year life cycle is if you're trying to establish the biocontrol, when they're in a 2-year life cycle, we've got this one stage of emerald ash borer development available across all these sites. And if they can't get at that one stage of the life cycle, then they don't have any food, even though there's lots of emerald ash borer. So that's starting to get unsynchronized now because there's more emerald ash borer in northern Maine. So there's lots of different stages of emerald ash borer up there. So it's hopeful that we'll start to see more establishment of the biocontrol up there. Because we got 3 sites in northern Maine, and I think there's 5 release sites in southern Maine.
Is the net trend at the moment that the ash borer is still winning because we're still early in the stage of trying these biocontrols and having any success from that?
Yeah, I mean, it's like, it's a really long fight, so it's hard to say winning or losing because, anytime you do a biological control, of a pest, it takes a lot of years before you start to see any improvement. And we're all thinking about the next generation of ash trees. Hopefully there's an establishment, some natural enemies of those trees have a better chance of bringing.
But that's the
themselves
big
to
impetus for collecting the seed, and
Yes,
is because we hope that it will be a biocontrol solution,
right.
that we can reestablish the populations.
Yeah, and we gotta collect across everything so that we get a good genetic diversity across our seed collection, so we don't lose some of that when we try to reestablish the tree.
I was curious, you spoke about, male, female trees. Somebody did that.
We're both that way.
Yeah. Male, female, and the
Polygamous.
polygamous one, right? And do they all sort of mast at the same time, or do they have different masting times? And like say you go out and you're identifying trees on your property, would they all sort of be one or the other? Or, like and also when you're generating them, are we like coding for them? And for those like genetic diversity aspects, I guess I would be curious about that.
Yeah, so there isn't, we don't know genetically within the makeup of ash to be able to tell, and then we don't have the technology to say this is gonna be a male tree, or this is gonna be a female tree, so we can't necessarily do that in the genetic work. It could be done, it could be learned over time, but it would be also really, that'd be a lot of genetic sequencing for every tree to get that accomplished, but as far as the masting, a lot of the trees will start to show early spring, their flower development before they have leaves because they're wind pollinators. And so early spring is a great time to go and check if you have male or female. The male flowers, we didn't have pictures, but they're like really globular looking. And then the female flowers are like really wispy. They've got more of a kind of branching pattern that kind of makes it look like a little fan hanging off the end of the tree. There was one in here before, it's still in here. So that's one way you can tell if you've got a male or female on a tree. And for our inventory work, we try to do that, is find out if we have male or female trees, because we can flag them as sites to come back and do seed collection. A polygamous tree is hard to tell because they really do look kind of like a mix between the globular and wispy flower. And so they're not true polygamous in that there's only polygamous flowers. They've got male flowers and this polygamous weird looking flower, or female flowers in this polygamous hard to tell flower.
Right,
So-
we're totally confused now.
Yeah, so they're still male or female dominant, but then they've got the polygamous flower too, so it really throws them for a loop.
And you're saying the polygamous flower is not male or female, it's a different,
It's a mix, so some
it's a
they'll
mix of
produce.
male and female.
Yeah, so a polygamous tree, no matter what, will produce seed, which is why it's great if you do find one. But they don't self-pollinate, so it's not like it's the last one
Right.
standing, it's going to have success. It'll make both of those flowers at different times so that it doesn't self-pollinate.
But one of the most important parts that we focus on is identifying the mother tree, the females, because they're the ones that are going to have seed. So, you know, it's just important to have a male on the landscape, but when it comes to who is going to produce seed at this point, you want the female tree, you want the mother tree on the landscape, because that's where you're going to get the seed and the genetic material from. So, but it's important to know what's on your property regardless. And then the polygamous is just one of those weird nature things that gets thrown in there. It's kind of interesting, but so actually the background of my computer screen, that is ash, and that's, those are seed, and when the seed falls off the stem that holds the seed to the tree, that's the wispy. But that's the wispies that you'll see the next year. So when you're on the ground looking 30 feet up in the air with your binoculars, you're trying to look for these like wispy little fingers on the ends of the branches. Yeah, is that it?
Yeah.
Yep, that's the little wisps. That's what
It
this
sounds
is.
hard, but it's really, once you get used to seeing
Yeah.
it, it's really easy. It's
That's a really
quick
small-
Telltale sign.
But, and the males
That
are,
is the. what
like
all the
Tyler
seeds-
said, kind of globular.
flower is called.
You may also notice a male tree in the off season that you can see these like black globs on the tips, and that's from a gull mite.
Yeah, this gull infests only male flowers, so if you see these really black globular flowers that hold over to right now, they'd still be on the tree.
Yeah.
And usually if you find one, then they're all throughout the site, because all the male trees end up getting it if one tree has it. So that's a good way to tell them apart too.
So that was my next question with regards to if you're focusing in on mother seed trees, like, and we're talking about chemicals applications for them, how long does that last in the tree? And, you know, like, I've heard, you know, there's concern on the basket maker's part, because then if you're treating these chemicals to the trees, and then they're like sitting there working with it all the time. Like
Yeah.
it could not be good possibly for them and their health.
Yeah.
So that would be my next question is,
how long does that last?
And what are the chemical treatments?
The most effective chemical is any product that has imamectin benzoate, and that chemical is what kills emerald ash borer. And it's most effective because it kills at the highest rate, and it's one that you only have to treat every 2 years is what the bottle says, but you can get away with 3 years, or some people even push it to 4 years. Because it's expensive. You have to have the proper licensing and the equipment to administer it's gotta be injected into the tree because it's a systemic insecticide. So very costly, especially if you wanna do it in a forest where you're doing multiple trees. So you gotta do it every 3 years. And then for a basket maker, you could say after that 3-year period, the chemical's gone down enough that it would be safe to handle. And there's a researcher at the University of New Hampshire that we recently talked with that did some testing of different parts of the ash tree as the chemical moved through it. And at year 3, there's 1%, 1 part per billion of the active ingredient. And at that point, it's equivalent to what the FDA says is safe in vegetables. And sometimes you do find imamectin benzoate in our food. So after 3 years, it should be safe enough to handle. But it's so expensive and we're trying to save the tree. Generally, you're not going to cut down a tree that you've injected. You're going to leave it so that it can produce seed. It will go into the leaf litter, and that's something that we want to know how it breaks down. But again, this study showed that there's not enough in the leaf litter to affect other insects navigating the duff layer and these stream ecosystems and stuff. But it is a risk. The big one early on was honeybees and pollinators, but where it's a wind pollinated species, that's not as huge a concern. It's still a concern because that could happen by chance that a pollinator does pollinate an ash tree. But again, it gets back to the risk outweighs, the reward outweighs the risk, in that we're saving this really unique tree.
We have time for maybe a couple more questions.
I think you're kind of touching on this. Well, you're definitely touching on this, but I'd love you to dive a little deeper into kind of the integrated approach with, we've got this parasitoid that's hopeful, we've got the occasional use of pesticides that's hopeful, and then there's this research from, you guys had earlier in the summer, the genetic testing, potential resistant species and how important that is to this endeavor.
Yeah, so if you throw it all at the wall and see what sticks, if you do the silviculture, you're trying to regenerate. Step 1, you might mess up. Maybe you don't get any ash back. So you've got to supplement that regeneration. So if you've got seed and you can produce some seedling stock, you can underplant in these sites to make sure that ash stays at the site. Ash does a lot to maintain the soil there, maintain the hydrology. So as emerald ash borer comes through and wipes it out, we don't know how much it will change. Studies in the lake states have shown that it could change a lot. So the idea is to try to maintain ash over the long term. And the reason we're doing that is for the biocontrol, right? We can maintain ash there and prolong its life on the landscape, then these biocontrols might get established. And then we've got a natural enemy of emerald ash borer on the landscape that keeps emerald ash borer populations low enough so that ash trees, emerald ash borer, and the parasitoid can all live in a balance. And so we still have ash trees, we still have emerald ash borer, but we've also got this parasitoid wasp and woodpeckers. Woodpeckers are a native biocontrol that's really effective, but usually that's when the tree's dying. But all of those kind of working together to keep it in balance. We're restoring the balance so that ash trees stay on the landscape. Then we can use the tree seeds that we've collected. We know that some sites we're not gonna be able to do all this, throw everything at the wall and see what sticks. Some sites are gonna be completely wiped out, but if we know that there was ash there, then we can do some matriation and take that seed, grow it out and replant ash there. Then that seed could be used in genetic research, do some common garden experiments to see what trees have some of the genetics to try and combat emerald ash borer. And we know that some trees do have some genetic resistance. It's just, even if you took an ash tree from Asia and put it here in these forests, emerald ash borer is so high in population density that it also wouldn't survive here. So once we get the populations low enough, maybe we do have the gene pool, to find trees that would survive. But if we lose that seed, we don't collect that seed, we don't have it stored, we don't start doing the genetic research. 100 years down the line, we don't have the ability to bring that back to the landscape, so really makes it critical that we're doing it now and trying to protect it.
Do the ash borers target a particular age of tree? Like, would they, move to a larger tree versus like the smaller seedlings or anything?
Yeah, they generally will hit the overstory first. If there's a tree that's already threatened, some native borer, some frost damage, or drought that really hit it hard, that stress tree is gonna get hit by emerald ash borer first. That's why we oftentimes will peel a tree intentionally, make a girdled tree to try and monitor for emerald ash borer, because it will suck it locally to that tree, and then we can peel it and see if it's there. So those are first. If there's no management occurring at that site, you've got a lot of stressed trees, you can get a population boom of emerald ash borer, and then you've got this really high level of emerald ash borer, and then it's got nothing to feed on, so it starts to hit trees that are like this big. And so even though you had some trees started, because none of the management took the time to try and take care of the ash trees in the overstory, now these ones are gonna get hit, and you lose these as well. So it'll go down to an inch, but if it's a site that's pretty resilient, populations don't get high enough that those trees typically don't get hit on the initial wave.
We've got a black shirt and I've got a purple shirt here. Black shirt, why don't you go first?
Just super quick, could you say a few more words about the symposium next fall and who will be participating? Is it open to the general public?
Yeah, I think it definitely will be open to the general public. We're still working out the details. Yeah, we hope that anybody who's attended any of our events can, or been involved in our work, so definitely involved. And we're still hammering out the schedule, but I think we're gonna have, some researchers like Deb Holland, who does a lot of work on, pesticides and insecticides come. We'll probably have basket makers come. And do demonstrations. We'll have Emily talk about seed collection.
But it's an event that's been built over time, so there have been other ash symposiums, brown ash symposiums. But it has since, what was the last one, the one in Vermont?
2018.
Yeah, so it's been, 5 years, so we're looking to have, it's pretty much an opportunity for the researchers and basket makers and the people who have been a part of this monitoring and protection effort to come together and present their findings to each other. But it's of course open to the public, and we want people who have taken part in all of our events in the last year or so to be able to get involved and kind of become a stakeholder and support the work that's being done. So there'll be a lot more information about that coming forward on our website. And then if you're on our mailing list, you'll get emails about that. And I think the last point that I want to make is that for a very long time, this was a very sad topic, and people were very upset about this species, and we're going to lose all the ash, and it's going to look bad for a while. When emerald ash borer comes through, we're going to see dead trees everywhere. It's happening in Portland, it's happening in other places in southern Maine, and there is a psychology of losing the trees. And you'll hear other people from other states talk about how it went through my neighborhood, everything's dead, it's so sad, nothing looks like it used to look. We are gonna have that, hopefully not to the extent, but what we're working on is the long-term goal, that we want ash on the landscape, and we're working to see what we need to do to put that in place. And we're going to have to live with emerald ash borer. It's gonna be here, and there's no way to completely wipe it out. But that doesn't mean that we can't come up with a balance in the future. So there is a big sign of hope. It's not as doom and gloom as it used to be. Even some of the most really down, depressed people in the research group everybody's really starting to have hope again. So that's a very exciting part of the work that we're in. So we appreciate you all. Was there one last question? Oh, okay, sorry.
I mean, I'm guessing the answer to this is no, because I'm guessing that there are not so much seed being collected that you have an excess or that you're having to work really hard to advance the collection efforts you have. But my question is there ever a concern about over collecting seed so that also the populations that may reproduce themselves without our assistance and go through their own natural selective cycles might be being impaired because enough seed is being removed from a particular geographic area?
Tyler can definitely talk about the orphan cohort quickly, but generally you don't want to go out and just strip a tree of all
Right.
its seed.
Right.
And under normal conditions, we would say don't do that. The likelihood that you're going to strip an entire tree with how big these trees are is very low. You're not gonna do that. Are we taking away food from other animals in the environment? Yeah, we are. But this is like Tyler's been saying, the need outweighs the risk, the importance outweighs the risk. Unfortunately, brown ash in particular is not a species that had buckets and buckets of seed in storage beforehand, like we do with some other species. There have been white and green ash seed collections across the area before, but just not brown ash. So at this point, it's
Because it didn't have the forestry value?
yeah. It's not a timber tree,
Yeah,
and they're
okay.
hard to get access to. Who wants to pull a tree out and
It's in a
Swamp.
swamp, and they're also just, white and green are on the streets, so they're a lot
Right.
more accessible to people.
the timber value of white, and it's I mean, John, our advisor who's not here tonight, will talk about some of the first few big ash meetings he went to. The baseball bat industry was at,
Yeah.
and then they decided, you know what, we'll just go with maple, we don't care. And so they put their hands up. So, there's definitely been a difference in players over the years of working with this species, but brown ash has never been on the same level economically
Right.
to the entire
You
state.
don't have any comparisons of the three trees together, do you?
I'm
we
sorry, I
photos?
didn't put that in this
Photos?
one.
Yeah,
It's on the
Oh,
website, yeah, it's on the website, it's
Oh.
on the manual. Oh, it looks like
Oh,
there's some right there.
This is only one handout. This has, this is just black ash.
Yeah, if you're able to go to our website,
Okay.
it's on there. Yep.
Great. Thank you so much, everyone, for coming out. And I just want to plug the Land Trust one more time. This is a resource for everybody in the community who wants to help in this endeavor and to collect seeds. For those of you zooming in, Samuel, Scarborough Land Trust Stewardship Director speaking. Please jump on our website, sign up for our volunteer opportunity mailing list, our e-news if you're interested. I'll be leading some tree inventory on our 1,600 acres that the Land Trust manages in the spring. I need volunteers for that, so please get in touch with me or keep an eye on our website for events and volunteer opportunities if you want to come out and help with this effort. And then in the fall, we'll do some seed collection as well. But a big, humongous thank you for APCAW.